Okay, welcome to the Broken Mindsets podcast. Today's topic is going to be love, purpose, and peace. Sort of my one-liner on how to live a meaningful life. Today I'm speaking with Noah Tallman. He graduated from Franklin College with a bachelor's degree in political science and history. He interned under the Indiana House of Representatives. He's currently on track to become a lawyer, and in his personal life, he's spent the past several years really diving pretty deep into philosophy. He's also my best friend of 11 years. Today, we dive into a somewhat wide range of topics, not strictly limited to love, purpose, and peace, although I think they tie pretty deeply into the main topic at hand. I also want to let everybody know ahead of time, there was a bit of a problem with my audio, so you'll hear me speaking very quickly. That was the audio trying to catch back up, so you'll hear me sort of speed talking from time to time, and I apologize for that. Shouldn't be a problem in the future. Since this is my first podcast, I feel that it's worth mentioning. I certainly don't think that I have all the answers to any of the subjects that we get into here, especially something so broad as love, purpose, and peace. These are simply methods and tools that we've found useful in our own lives, and we're just looking to share and benefit as many people as we can with the knowledge that we currently have. And any subject we ever do get into, the same will apply. But on that note, we're going to jump right in. Okay, so I started thinking about this phrase love, purpose, and peace a lot because of the fact that in my personal life, I always felt like people were heading down really weird paths, and when they were looking for what they would understand as a meaningful life. And in a discussion between us, you and I sort of put together the actual phrase love, purpose, and peace as kind of my one-liner on how to live a meaningful life. And so what this is really meant to be is just kind of a compass or a gauge on how to navigate those things in a constructive way. Because I think that people aren't actually that confused on what is good for them. I think a lot of people know, you're not supposed to eat fast food. You want to have good connections, good relationships, have a job that you like, but that doesn't actually force them down those paths. It's really just a lack of understanding why those things exist. So this is just kind of a look in to see what that is. And so, purpose, it's a tricky one because there's so many things that go into this. And I think when we're trying to take a look at it, what it really is like you have to have things in your life that have a deeper seated meaning than just what you get at face value. So, whenever we're talking about money, that sounds really good. Money sounds great. And it sounds like something that you would really want, but in a lot of ways, it can easily corrupt you and take you down a path with no meaning. And that's kind of why you see movie stars and actors and whatnot just have very, very empty lives and so forth. So I think that the movie star analogy is a good representation of the symptoms of sort of the bigger problem where people are just living unfulfilled lives. And so I think the important thing that we have to do is kind of take a step back and look at what is causing that and what's causing us to lead these meaningless lives where we just feel like we don't have any real purpose or where we don't have real connections, and where people aren't very happy or at peace with themselves in any way, shape, or form. They don't like the person they see in the mirror. So, no, if you want to kind of dip into this a little bit.
Yeah, yes. I think it's important to, in certain respects, kind of set the stage here and describe the stakes. What is it that we're up against? What is it that is the ailment that we're in such need of a prescription for? And really, I think to do that, I think it's important to just kind of examine, what is the human being and the world that we find ourselves in. And I think what's important here is kind of identifying the duality of human experience, this kind of dichotomy that characterizes the way we interact in the world. And really, the way I do that is examining, how we are as organic. Animate beings in the natural world. Just like any other animal, we exist, we breathe, we live our life, and we die. And we can make objective claims about that, biological claims about that, just like we could about rocks or any other animal or plant or anything like that. So we have that on the one hand, and we experience that world. And then on the other hand, we also experience this conceptual world, and it's the subjective human experience. And really, this comes from our own experience, our conscious, and our awareness of self that kind of makes us feel that we live beyond the natural world. And in many ways, this discriminates us from any other animal, because we look at the ideas of things and we want to know what they're for. And this is why we struggle so much with things like meaning and purpose. And so, kind of important with this is really just identifying the landscape that this duality of human experience lives in. And it's a tragic landscape. And what makes it worse is that we're enlightened to it. We're aware of it. And I have 4 different ways to do this, and there may be many more. I could certainly go on, but I think these are really important. The first is that life itself necessitates death, and we're aware of this, and it always it's outpacing us. We can never really catch it. And the second is that we are limited beings, and so is everyone around us. Right? We have a certain capacity, a hard stop on our potential. And the third is that we are subject to the arbitrary whims of tragedy, where things happen indiscriminate of the character that we would assign to people. Good people can get sick undeservedly, and bad people can have quite fortunate things happen to them. And the fourth, and perhaps the most important here, is that we also actively contribute to our own suffering and that of other people. And we do this consciously. Every day we engage or partake in conversations or activities or experiences that we know are not good for ourselves or the quality of life for those around us. And what's really clear to me is that in many respects, we live in spite of these difficulties. Every breath you take is in unconscious defiance of these issues. And this really, I think, is a great way to kind of establish and describes the stakes that characterize our life. And for me, that's why, when we start talking about the meaning of life, and again, I think this is an instinct that spawns in our conceptual experience, in our subjective experience. For me, it is simply the extent to which you can manifest something in your life that transcends the tragedy of your own experience. So when you look at the totality of your experience and the fact that you have a finite time on this world, what are you going to do with that time? And I think that really is an important way to kind of describe what has led to this specific conversation.
Right, and I completely agree, and I think, when you're trying to put together, a way to, spend time meaningfully, you have to kinda use death as a sort of a gauge in this respect because it's just a reference point to not waste your time, So, you see this a lot where people can just spend, a day just playing video games or watching movies or staying in bed or just doing something completely meaningless, but when you have a reference point on death, this just seems obnoxious almost, just to spend so much time doing, nothing, right? And so when you are trying to figure out what gives you purpose, you have to kind of leave those things in the dust and focus on what's giving meaning to the world and to your own life. So I think an important thing to talk about is the fact that this has been discussed in a lot of different ways and proven in a lot of different ways. But I think that across the board, it's pretty clear that we really only find meaning in our lives by contributing either to the world or to other people. So that can be nature, that can be through connections to nature, it can be through connections to people, or just bringing the whole the whole world one step forward, and contributing to society. So I think that's something really important to consider, because if you are in sort of um, a workforce that just doesn't give those things, you're more than likely going to end up feeling like you don't really have much purpose to your life at all, and you're gonna feel really, really lost right off the bat, and you're not gonna know why, and so this is an important thing to be mindful of, and because when you look back on your deathbed and you're thinking, what's important to me in this moment, and you don't have any connections, and you didn't really contribute in any way, and you don't really have much of a legacy, the first thing you're going to think is, wow, I really wish I would have spent some time like contributing to society and to other people, and leaving my mark on the world. And so this is something people tend to just forget about. And it's really sort of my main reference point when you're talking about purpose, because we really only leave a mark on the world by contributing to it, in some potentially good way. And of course, you can leave a really negative mark, like if you're a serial killer or something. But even that's not something that's disputed as being something you want. So if you're wanting to leave a meaningful mark, you have to focus in on what matters, and that's always going to lead back to connections, either towards nature or to the world, and so and to people. And it's really interesting too, because the difference between like the connections with nature and to people, they're very pronounced, and so you have people that can literally go into caves for like 5 years and come out an incredible person because of it. They spent all this time alone, in what would be a mind-numbing experience to most people, especially in this generation, and it come out just as incredible people. Their intelligence is just soaring through the roof, and they seem to have such a good grasp on what really matters, and they seem so fulfilled, and that's really just because for one, they're connecting to their spirituality and with nature and everything, and they're trying to understand themselves. That's an important thing that you have to do as well. Is just to um, really dive into yourself and figure out where you personally will contribute. So that's just a really important thing to be mindful of.
Yeah, and I think something helpful here is if you kind of viewing your life as a narrative that takes place in a book, right? With a book, that there is a finite amount of pages. There is a beginning and there is an end. And I think everybody's experienced this. When you have your favorite book or your favorite TV show or your favorite movie, when it ends, it is sad, right? Because that portion of time is over now and you can't get it back. The difference is that you can go back and rewatch it. And it might not be the same experience, but you can kind of relive those moments. And that's the part where this example falls apart, right? Because even though you can examine your life as a narrative, you can't go back and reread the pages. You only get to read them once. And what that means is that, every day you're putting words on the page, right? And you might not know you're doing it. And but that 24-hour allotment you have, you only have so many words you can fit on it, and it's happening every moment. And what's really cool about this is, just like you can form an opinion about a novel or a movie, you can do the same with your life. At a certain point, you can actually just step back and say, is the story of my life a book that I'd want to read? Would I want to read this book? Would I want to watch this movie, the one that characterizes my life? And, that's a really good way that people can gauge, and people do this already, right? People form an opinion of the experience that they're living. And this is really what leads a lot of people to, either very negative or very positive feelings of their life and the meaning in it. And just to kind of pick up on a point that you'd kind of explained here, about, just kind of finding that meaning and especially whenever you're on your deathbed, again, I think what's important is when you look back, do you feel like you contributed to something? I think for people, there's this great conflict, a battlefield, and we're at war with the finite and the infinite. When you look at the extraordinary vastness of time and our finite place in it, I think everybody's great concern is just being swallowed in it. And that makes people feel like that period of time in which they're allotted is less valuable. So people instinctively have a need to kind of maximize the import of that finite amount of time that they have. That way they don't get swallowed by infinite time. And like you'd mentioned, I think one of the best ways to do that is to make sure that what you're doing is of value, and not just to yourself, but also to the greater community and people. And I think that's a pretty good place to kind of pick up on purpose. That could be a good gauge for it.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I really like that analogy of actually using your life as a novel that you would read, because I think a lot of people can pretty straightforward say that no, they wouldn't read the novel of their own life, right? And that's a really good gauge to know whether or not what you're doing has any real purpose. And just to kind of like tie in my own personal experiences with this, most people who know me know that whenever I was sort of in my youth, and I guess I still am kind of in my youth, but my early youth, I was doing a lot of crazy stuff. And for a lot of people, like especially around that time, people used to talk about it a lot and talk like it was the coolest thing ever. And I really did enjoy it. I'm naturally kind of an adrenaline junkie, right? And so that was fun. But there was definitely a point where it just wasn't that fun anymore, and the risk associated with it was kind of coming to a halt in how much I like to experience those things. And I was sort of confused by it because I had dedicated so much of my life to really like, for one, videoing those things. I was making videos of the crazy stuff that we were doing on a daily basis, and I still enjoy doing that, but it doesn't provide the same type of purpose that I thought that it did at the moment. And so when I'm looking back on this, I can tell you straight up, for those of you who don't know, what I do for a living, I'm a personal trainer, and so when I first had the job, I didn't really appreciate it very much, and I had fun, and I wasn't really reading much into it, because I was still living in the mindset that I didn't want to work there forever, and that I didn't want to um, do this long term. But as time went on and I started to get a better grasp on purpose itself and what brought meaning into my life, and I started to see the people I was working with change on a daily basis, I've had this overwhelming feeling of just like real purpose, like I was doing something that mattered, and they were living examples of where I was contributing to them, and what mattered to me, and so it's really interesting to think about how that can evolve. But that was a big moment for me personally, because I mostly became a personal trainer because I was bored. I was making okay money with what I was doing, and at the time I was just doing wedding videos, and I still do those, but I was just doing it for money, and I had a lot of free time because really weddings are only on the weekends and so forth. So, but I took the job because I was super bored, and more money is always good, and so I didn't go into it with very many expectations. But what came out of it was just this really incredible thing, because I learned what it's like to contribute to somebody very directly, and then see where it can be in a positive way. And so obviously I'm not the focus here, but at the same time, it's important to recognize that, because you're allowed to appreciate what's good for other people in a personal way. So that was a big moment for me anyway, anywho. And and it's important to recognize that. And so when you're looking internally, and you're thinking to yourself, where is this going to apply in my own life? I think that that's an important thing to do. Am I just having fun, or am I actually contributing in some way? Because at the time, I really thought that I was contributing with my videos by entertaining people, but it wasn't very much purpose, and more often than not, it probably just sent people down the wrong path. And so it's important to distinguish between the two.
Yeah, right. And I think what's important here is not to knock the importance of having fun, right? You do want to enjoy your moment to moment experience. Ultimately, what the goal is to marry, what's fun for you with what's meaningful. And I think that's kind of a balance that a lot of people are really striving for in their life. And I can speak personally on this as well. For a long time, I didn't know what I want to do. And what I ended up realizing is I was spending more time worrying about figuring out what the best course of action was for me to take with my life, than I was just actually living it. And the scary thing with that is that you turn around one day and you look behind you and you realize that it all caught up really quick. And I think one of the most tragic things you can do is look back over a period of your life and realize that, you were just needlessly upset. I think when you think of the grand scheme, again, I think this is always a good point to kind of anchor your reflection here is it really worth being mad in this moment? Is it really worth being angry? Is it worth having that argument or that conflict? And most of the time it's not. And for some people it can take longer to figure out than others. And for me, I think I've mentioned this several times. Is I didn't find out what I wanted to do until I was a sophomore in college. So I was halfway done with my undergrad before I figured out any idea of what I was going to do. And so it's a journey everybody walks, and it's not, for some people it takes, to use the metaphor I used previously, for some people it takes more pages. For some people it takes more pages of their book to find out what that meaning and purpose is, and for other people it takes less.
Right. And I think this ties into another topic that we've kind of discussed, and so what it really is like I think people are fixated on fun in a lot of ways, and I think that that's more so associated with what they quote unquote thinks makes them happy. So in the moment, let's say you're on the road and you get a severe case of road rage. The first thing you want to do is you want to yell and scream and ram that person's car if you were living in some alternate reality or something. But that that's not really what you should do. So it might be fun and it might make you happy in the moment, but it doesn't mean that that's the course of action you should take. And so this really ties into a topic that we've talked a lot about, and it's the fact that happiness isn't always a good gauge for our lives. It can really mislead us in a lot of ways and just take us down roads that we don't want to walk. Because a lot of things make you happy in a moment, but they're not going to lead to a meaningful life. And I think that this is also a very millennial issue because of the fact that it's portrayed very, very much that even in Disney movies, this is an early thing that we see. It's just that what makes you happy is what you should spend your life doing, and that's really not what it is. That's a really bad thing to use as a compass. And so I know we've talked about this a lot, and a lot of my thoughts came from you. So I'll kind of let you dive into this one.
Yeah, for me, this is one of the most important pieces, and the reason why is because it's so deeply ingrained in our culture, especially in the West. Some Eastern cultures focus more on things that I think we're going to advertise later, but the West has always been really focused on happiness, and I mean you can retrace these steps all the way back to the Greeks. A lot of Greek philosophers, their ultimate focus of life was happiness. And when we start talking about what humans are rationally motivated towards and, what their nature is, for the Greeks, it was always happiness. And it was always humans do things that they think are going to allow them to reach happiness. And my big point here is that it's always going to be a carrot on a stick. And it's never going to be the resolution of the conflict in which we all find ourselves in. And I can describe this in four different ways. And of course, there's many different reasons why I don't think happiness is sufficient, a sufficient boat to navigate our lives. The first of this is, it fails to describe the totality of human existence. Human beings are much more than just happiness. And there's going to be a lot of your life where you're not happy. To describe the ultimate goal of human beings as being happy, well, that's just going to be a continuous disappointment. And I think people know this and people feel this. It's kind of like you're chasing a high, and except every time you get it, it's not as good as the first time, right? So the second part here is that what you do here is you allow the goal of your life to be out of your control. I think I've said this many times, is the best we can do is just allow, create the circumstances for happiness to descend upon us. That's the best we can do because we can't actually synthesize it. We can't manufacture it. We can satisfy sensual desires, but the resolution of this greater conflict in which we find ourselves, that doesn't cut it. And ultimately, you want to characterize the quality of your life based off of things that are in your control, in your conscious decision making control. And happiness just isn't. The third issue here is that, you know, kind of I've already mentioned it, is that leading and chasing happiness, it'll just be an endless race that you will run your entire life. And when you catch it, it will be brief. And when you get to the top of that mountain, when you get to the peak, by definition, with that metaphor, is you're going to have a huge fall. And when you are satisfied with being miserable, just for this vague idea of future happiness, well, what happens is you waste your whole life being miserable. And I think a good way to look at this in the small term is just when you look at your week, right? People think, okay, well, I just got to make it to the weekend because in the weekend I'm going to be happy and I'm going to be doing nothing. I'm going to be relaxing, I'm going to be having fun, whatever. Well, when that's your goal, that what that means is that most of your week you're not doing things you want to be doing. And then those 2 days pass quick and then you go into the next week and that might be okay short term, but when you expand that to the totality of your life, it's very obvious to see how that's just simply insufficient for leading a life that you want. And the final issue I'll raise here is that, there's many times in your life where you simply should not be happy. Is the proper response with the death of a loved one to be happy? Right? When you let's say you're taking a test and you get a bad grade, is the proper response then to be happy? When a coworker says something mean to you, it's simply not the proper response. Happiness is a whim; it comes and goes, and you can't control when it descends upon you. And if that's the focus of your life, then your entire life is in the hands of something that is out of your grasp.
Right, and I think you see this a lot again with the, the sort of movie star analogy because, people see these people having so much fun and really experiencing what is quote unquote considered the American good life, right? And so for us, we view that as being super desirable, but in a lot of ways, it's just not what's going to bring meaning into our lives. And so what really ends up happening with Americans, especially, is we will set a little goal and we'll say, okay, well, when I reach that goal, I'll be happy. I can relax and enjoy my life at that point. And then they reach that goal and they realize they're not any happier than they were before because that's not where meaning is. That's not what brings meaning into our life. And so um, this applies over and over and over again because people can set little goals and eventually make it to the top and then they look down at their life and they have nothing that they really care about. They just have all this wealth and they're up on their ivory tower and they don't really care, and it doesn't bring anything to them personally. And so they end up being these really empty individuals that are just bitter, and so you have to be very cautious not to walk that road. And I think when you bring this up, it's important to consider the antidote here because what really is going to bring happiness eternally, so to speak, would just be to be at peace because um, you don't want to, like you said, you don't want to be happy all the time. It doesn't even make sense to fundamentally be happy at certain times because it's just not healthy. That wouldn't make any sense to be happy when you lose a loved one. But what can happen is you can reach a point where you're at peace with yourself. And so whenever you lose a loved one, that's tragic, and you should be upset, and that's awful that you have to continue your life without them, and that's something you have to deal with on a daily basis. But if you're at peace with your life and yourself, and you know that you've done good to the world, it's much easier to move on and in a healthy way, because you see so many people they'll get broken up with, or they'll lose a loved one, or they'll have a major failure, and they just implode on themselves. And you have to ask why. And really, it's because they were viewing that as the one source of their happiness, and then they implode, and then they are just totally lost. And so you need to learn to be at peace with yourself, and I think that that's going to be the antidote at all times, because when you're at peace, you can, instead of constantly riding the waves of happiness where you just up and down and up and down, and then you don't have any stability in your life. That's what peace can be, is stability, when you're riding the waves of happiness, and you can just let that, like you said, descend upon you, in all the best ways possible. And so I think that that's sort of what I would use as a gauge towards meaning. Are you at peace with yourself and with the life that you created? Because even though you lost that loved one or you lost that person that you were dating, and it's hard to get through, you can still appreciate what they brought into your life, and it doesn't have to be this uh, horrible experience. You don't have to look at them like you wish you never knew them, so you didn't have to feel the pain that you're in. You're just at peace with what they did bring to your life, and you can appreciate who they were, and what you've learned from them, and the time that you spent and the happiness that you shared in those moments. And so I think that that is what we should really use as a gauge for our lives in a more grand scale sort of way.
Yeah, and I think that when you ride the wave of happiness, you're always going to be suffering injury, right? And I think a good way to kind of look at this is it comes down to a matter of definition and how you frame the occurrences of your life. And I mentioned this earlier. Things are going to happen, and those things are only good or bad if you define them that way. And ultimately, this is a pretty old ideal here, but ultimately, things are neither good or bad that happen to you. They just happen to you, right? And when they do, it is then in your control on how you want to frame that particular experience. And I'll give you a good example here. When you work out, let's say you're bench pressing, right? And you can literally you can feel just the muscle fibers tearing. Um, you know that you're having a good workout and you're happy with yourself. When you're sore and you're cramped, that's a way you measure that you're doing well, right? You're progressing. But if you felt that sensation at any other time in your life when you weren't working out, you'd be terrified, right? So even when it comes down to something like pain, the way you frame the experience of that pain dictates how you perceive your experience. So in that way, framing is incredibly important. And ultimately, with peace, peace isn't the ignorance of the conflict of life. It's the resolution of it. It's the observation of it, and knowing that things will happen to you, and much of it will be out of your control. And if you base your life and the quality of your person on the things out of your control, then you're never going to get to where you want to go. Ultimately, you are a good or bad person depending on how you let things that happen to you change your person. And I think that's a really important thing to kind of describe here.
Yeah, no, and I completely agree. And I think that that's a really good analogy to give because people are really fixated as with pain as being a negative thing, and I don't really think that it is in a lot of ways. It can be used to grow in so many different respects, potentially every respect, because pain is what pushes you to be uncomfortable in so many ways. Let's take the gym for example. A lot of people can go through that and have the perspective that it sucks. It sucks to be in pain, right? And that is a very common thing thought of, among many Americans. Now you take somebody who's a bodybuilder, and they will literally have the biggest smile on their face when they're in pain.
Right.
And you have to wonder what the difference is, because really what it is just a matter of perspective. They know that that pain is causing them to be a better person, to be somebody who can endure, and somebody who can grow, and somebody who can become a badass, and push themselves in so many different ways outside of the gym. And so you have to make sure that you're not looking at something in a negative respect. And I want to give you a dumbed down version of this too, because I think that rain is a good analogy. And I know I've talked about this, and I think
Hmm.
that this is a good way to put it, because you have let's take two people who are heading to work. Okay. So you can have one person who is stuck in traffic, and they're pissed off, and they're just, looking out their window and seeing the rain and knowing that it's probably causing the traffic. And they just get all pissy, and they start cussing up a storm and honking at people so they'll go quicker, and they'll just never appreciate it. And then you have this other person, let's say, like, take an older man, and he's just retired, and he doesn't have these influences on him that's making him upset. And he can look back and just see how beautiful it is, and he sees the little rainbow coming out of the clouds, and he can appreciate the moment because it's a matter of perspective, right? You don't have to be pissed off that the rain is there, and so everything is a matter of perspective, and it's really, really dangerous to not view it that way. You have to analyze each moment that you're in and question, do I need to be freaking out here? Do I need to be upset? And oftentimes the answer is no, and you don't need to be. And so that's why that kind of brings back into the matter of death, because if you're thinking to yourself in that moment, is this going to matter when I'm on my deathbed? The answer is no. Did you make it to work on time that one particular day? Did that matter? No, it didn't. And you're not going to care about that. And so it's a good reference point to think about whenever you're trying to lead a life of purpose and of meaning. And so I think the rain analogy really depicts that well, and it's an important reference point to use death, as a reference point. And I think that that's always going to be something that people have a hard time doing because nobody likes to think of death as a good thing. But in a lot of ways, it brings beauty into our lives, and it helps us to focus on what really matters, and it keeps us pushing towards the right things rather than things that are meaningless. Because, like I said, if you're on your deathbed and your whole work life has been something that you're working in a like a lumber mill, or you're at a job where you just hate everybody around you, oftentimes you're not going to have any meaning from that. And I think that that's important to see the difference. And I'm not telling you to go quit all your crappy jobs. In a lot of ways you have to sort of grind it out, and that's an important thing. And this can also be a good thing to learn how to be uncomfortable and push yourself, but at the same time you don't want to spend your whole life there, and that's an important thing to recognize if you're planning on leading a meaningful life.
Yeah, and again, I think what everybody can do is spend some time defining what's external and what's internal. Because ultimately, like I've mentioned, the things that are external to you will always remain out of your control, right? And in this category, you've got sickness, you've got random occurrences in the day, you've got the way people treat you, right? A lot, or the way someone says or does something to you. These occurrences, they're not good or bad, and it's the conceptual nature of human beings, right? Where we also live in that conceptual world where we feel the need to characterize these occurrences, right? Because ultimately it's an injury to us, right? If you're only focused on happiness and chasing being content, or appeasing your sensual desires, you're going to be at constant injury, and you're going to be taking a constant offense to the happenings of the world around you, because it won't line up with the way that you've defined the terms of your life. If you use terms like good and bad for things that are out of your control, then you're always going to take offense because it feels like it's not fair, right? But ultimately, fairness has nothing to do with what happens to you. Fairness is the way that you treat other people, because that's what's in your control. Good and bad is the way that you define your experience. It's the way that you act in the world. Good and bad is the way that your actions end up unfolding in other people's lives. And I think a good way to really look at this is really analyzing the things that happen in your life, and figuring out what's in your control and what's not in your control. And there's a really good saying. This comes from Stoic philosophy, which is, if something happens to you, some injury or some wrongdoing, you leave the wrong in the moment in which it was committed, right? You don't need to bring it along with you, because in the next moment, you are not the person who you were in the previous moment. And if that wrongful act or that unfortunate thing continues to weigh upon your mind, then by definition, it is no longer the act that injures you. It's your opinion of it. It's your perspective of it. And that's what's injuring you. And so much of what really depresses or hurts us is our opinion of what happened, more so than what actually happened itself. And you can really look at this in a moment to moment type of way, and look at the things that happen to you and how you react to them. And if you're focused on understanding your stake in the world and understanding the things that happen, and understanding who you are, and ultimately what do you want, and what how do you want the experience of your life to be, when you're focused on these things, the things that happen to you just seem less important. And it's because that it's not what happens to you that matters. It's what you become from it. And what you become from it is actually who you are. If you undergo a terrible experience, that's not who you are. It's just simply something that happened in the context of your life. Who you are is the person who you are before, during, and more importantly, after that moment. And I think that's just a really great way to kind of navigate, how satisfied you are with your own experience.
Right, and I completely agree, and I think that another important tool to be mindful of is the fact that everything that we will naturally perceive as being negative, in a lot of ways, it's not a negative. Like I said before, this just helps you grow and become the person that you are. And so many people will uh, kind of harbor a lot of anger towards their parents or their past in a lot of ways, and like you said, it's in the past. Happened, it's come and it's gone. And now all you can do is, reflect on it, and what you become from it is up to you at that point. And so that's where responsibility comes into the matter because if you like let's say you lose a leg, okay? Uh, in that moment, it seems like your life's over. You can't walk anymore, but you still have a life, and there's still so many meaningful things that you can bring into the world. You still have a voice, and you can still um, really change things for the better. One small disability doesn't. I suppose that's not small, but one disability isn't going to remove the importance from what you have to say, and it's important to know that because, like you said, good and bad, they're just relative. You don't have to actually fixate on something because to a more intelligent person, they could have been living a somewhat meaningless life, and then they lose their leg, and it puts everything in perspective to where they're like, okay, well, I could have lost my life, not just a leg, and now they're thinking to themselves, look at all I do have. I have a wife. I have great friends. I have a job that I enjoy, and money in the bank where I don't have to worry about being, pushed out of my home at any point, and kids that I uh, have living on through my legacy. And so it gives you perspective, and that's an important thing to be mindful of because, again, like I said, you can be so fixated on the trauma that you've endured, and you don't have to be defined by those things. I knew this girl who her mother left her early on, and she is incredibly intelligent. She's a really amazing person, and so I'm not going to say that that's because of that, but at the same time, um, it's something to be mindful of because it was a hard thing to go through. I can't even imagine not having a mother. I didn't have to go through anything like that, and she did, and she became an amazing person, in spite of that, and, there's a lot of meaning there, and she's really, fixated on I don't know if she's planning to be a mother at any point, but let's say she is. I guarantee she will never, ever, ever do anything like that, and so in spite of that event, she is a better person because of it. And so that's something that you need to really be careful of because you can live your whole life resenting everything that's happened to you, and just be super bitter. You see this all the time with older people where they just bitter, bitter, and bitter on top. Like they just can't let things go, and that's why leading a really meaningful life is the the gauge that we have to use for what's going to bring purpose into our lives. And so you got to use that as a reference point and be appreciative of the wrongs that have gone on in your life because really that's who you are. You're not defined by the burger you just ate. That's meaningless, right? You're defined by the hardships and what you've accomplished and the pain that you endured going through those things. So um, that's something you have to be really careful to ignore because in our society, in a world where everybody's just a keyboard warrior and we are so, you know, we're always valuing what we see on social media as fact. We have to look internally instead of externally, because there's so much going on in the world that you can just hate and really be bitter of. But it doesn't matter at the end of the day if you're leading a meaningful life.
Yeah, and I think again, like a lot of this is just taking the time to sit down and, define the parameters of your life. When you want to find out what you want to do, right? Just the basic things that you'll use to kind of lay the bedrock of your life. You start at the end and you say, well, what would I be satisfied? Like if someone gave me the book, kind of like what we mentioned in the beginning, if someone gave me the book of my life, would it be a page turner? And what would make it a page turner? And that's kind of how you can find out what you want. And then from there, you find out who you are. And you do that by overcoming things. Like I've mentioned, human beings, we live in a constant state of conflict. It's our natural existence. So find your opponent, right? And find a tough one and see how you respond. Do you fail or do you succeed? And if you succeed, select a more difficult one. And if you fail, think, okay, so that's not who I am right now, but maybe could I be that person tomorrow? And people think this is such, they perceive it as the mountain that they're climbing. And I can get into why I think that's a terrible analogy in a bit. But really, it's way easier than what people think whenever you truly examine what's in your control and what's not. What's not in your control is how much money did you make that year. You worked your job and you got your salary. Like, you're not the one that's making your salary. But what you can control is how compassionate you are, how kind you are, how trusting you are, how good of a friend, how good of a girlfriend or a boyfriend. All these things, those are in your control. And if you want to be those things, you can only be those things in this moment, right? So it seems like such a long journey, but truly the journey is right now. If you want to be a compassionate person, then do something compassionate right now, because what you did doesn't matter. And what you're going to do isn't of consequence because it's not right now, which is the reality of your life. And, again, coming back to that terrible analogy of a mountain, if we just use it here but for a moment, right? The climb to the top, that's the best part, because the climb to the top is where you learn who you are. And when you fall, you fell, right? And you can learn why you fell and what that means about you. And what's more important, how did you get back up? And how did you keep going on that journey, right? Where the mountain analogy fails is in expressing the pleasure that comes from the climb, because that's where meaning is, that's where purpose is, and that's where you find out who you are. You don't come to that enlightenment at the top. You just don't. And if that's the only thing you care about, then you will disregard the climb and the pleasure of it, the true pleasure of it. So again, a lot of this is just defining your parameters. What do you want? Who are you? And you'll only learn those things by just living your life and observing it.
Yeah, I think that the mountaintop analogy is something to be mindful of, because that's sort of an American thing as well, where you feel defined by these mountaintop experiences, and oftentimes that's not really who we are. That's who we are to other people a lot of the time. I think that people view us on our you know sort of resume of what we've done with our lives, and that's not a terrible thing, but the fact of the matter is who you really are is based off of the climb that you were talking about. That's the hard part. That's where you became somebody. That's where you have value. The mountaintop experience is often where you look down and you either resent what you have spent so much time achieving, or you appreciate it for what it is, and you're really appreciating the climb, not the mountaintop experience, right? That's a very, very brief thing to define your whole life from, because if all you're looking for is the next mountaintop experience, you're going to be running from one thing to the next at all times. And so it's important to appreciate the struggle, and to appreciate it for what it really is, rather than just being defined by what other people will define you by.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just to kind of put a bow on the peace aspect of this, um, you can attain this by observing these things we've been discussing, right? Making the distinction between external events and your own actions that you're in control of, right? And most important is being kind to others, observing that they're on this same journey too, and that much of what goes on in their life is out of their control. And if you are going to judge the actions of other, make sure you're judging the actions and not just things that have happened. And going into that, most importantly, being kind to yourself. You cannot hold yourself hostage to the events that befall you, right? If you're constantly berating yourself for the things that have happened to you, you will never be able to just simply appreciate this moment and move forward with peace. And I think that's a really important distinction there, a thing to kind of underline. If you're looking to kind of implement these ideas into your own life, that's the way you go about doing it. You do it by being kind and understanding to others, and more importantly, because you can't do that unless you're also kind and understanding to yourself.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And I'm glad you made that point too, because I think that something that people are just always lacking is being kind to themselves and not tearing yourself apart for a simple mistake. This happens all the time. And so I think that if you really want to be successful and be at peace, you have to learn to be um, positive to yourself. Wake up in the morning, look yourself in the mirror, and really appreciate what you see, even if it's not the person that you currently are. And so that's an important point that you made, and I think that that's a really good thing that you made it. Okay, so I want to talk about love here because it's this is without a doubt at the tip top of everybody's priority list when they're looking at a meaningful life, and really the connections behind them are what brings so much purpose into somebody's lives. And so I want to talk about it in a more kind of broad sense where we can kind of dive into how they're all alike and really the major difference between um, a relationship with any random person versus a romantic relationship is just that, just the fact that there's a romantic relationship there. And I know we've talked about this a lot. I know, so I'm going to let you take the reins on this.
Yeah, at that point, it's really more of just a kind of a qualification, a distinction of definition, really, that you're making, and it's not something to downplay. But I agree. I want to speak about this more broadly, because what, at the end of the day, is important is just relationships. And I think it's important to understand that when we speak of relationships, we're not just talking about romantic relationships, we're talking about all of them. And when we talk about love, we're not just talking about the love you feel for your significant other, we're talking about the love you feel for your parent, maybe a coworker, a friend, or a niece or nephew. So there's many different things that I think that we're going to be able to unpack here, and I'm just going to kind of lay some of my ideas out, and then from there we can kind of go through each one. The first among these is, and perhaps most important, is not having expectations and just loving the person, right? This goes back to really what I started with at the beginning, which is we have this tendency to live in the conceptual world where when we see someone, we don't always see their physical person. Sometimes we see the idea of them that we've kind of constructed in our head. And people are never going to live perfectly to the idea of them that you've made. So just kind of looking at that person as that person, and not any idea of them. And then secondly is what's really important is being deeply intrigued by this person, interested by the mystery of them. There's things that you want to know, and not just for the sake of checking a box. Like, okay, now I know what this person's brother's name is, or what their niece's name is. I'm going to memorize it as some trivial fact. It's more about, really wanting to find out the way this person looks at the world and what they have to bring, and being intrigued by it. And then, what comes with this is understanding and accommodating the responsibilities that come with relationships. This is really how you mediate them. And here is where we find the meaning and value that comes, doing things for other people, right? Um, Doing things to make them happy, or to bring some light to their day. That's really the meaning, and where the value is found in relationships is increasing the well-being of the people in your life and allowing them to do the same for you. And I want to tie this back into, just because I think it's relevant here, happiness, right? What you look for in a true relationship isn't necessarily do they make you happy, because again, that's not in their control or yours, right? And this is where a lot of people fail here, is that, they dictate the quality of their friendship or their romantic relationship, or that with their parent, or however, and they qualify it with, well, do they make me happy? And that's the absolute wrong way of looking at it. What you look for is do they increase the well-being of my life? And that's a much broader thing to look into, much beyond just do they make me happy? Because not only is that out of their control, it's out of yours. And really what's more important, I think, is are they willing to appreciate me for who I am, and go through this walk of life with me? And I think that's a big pitfall many people fall into. So I know I've kind of brought up a lot here, but maybe we can just kind of unpack some of these things here.
Right, and I will start with how you tied back into happiness here, because I think that that is a really important point to make. Oftentimes the people that are best for us, and this isn't just, like I said, not just um, about a romantic partner, but any quality relationship. Most of the time, those are the people who will speak plainly and who will really help you level up on a daily basis, and who bring interest into your life, like you were talking about. And so it is really important to be deeply interested by them, and because then you grow with them, and they grow with you. And I think that this is kind of tying back into, or kind of leading into another topic that's really important. Any quality relationship, they tend not to be broken um, beforehand. They grow together in awesome ways, and that's an important distinction to make, because a lot of people will outgrow each other and then move on. And so when you're looking for what would be considered a meaningful relationship, oftentimes it's people who are well put together, and bring value into your life, and help you grow in those ways. And so you want to find people in all aspects that are going to help you grow, and you can grow with them rather than apart. And that's something you see specifically in romantic relationships a lot, where they can just really grow apart, but they stay together, and those are never really quality relationships. They grow apart, and that's that. And so you want to have somebody who's deeply interested by you, and that you're deeply interested as well in. And that's a really important thing to point out.
Yeah, yeah, I 100% agree. And just kind of going along with that, um, you know, what's of ultimate importance here is that we kind of clarify one thing, because I don't want people to think that, for you to have a good relationship, that you and the other person have to have everything figured out, right? That's not what we're saying. And it's also an unrealistic expectation, right? Like when you're looking for a friend or a relation, or like a romantic relationship, you don't want to start with, okay, well, can I be friends with this person? Well, do they have their career planned out? Like, do they have, the appropriate ties to their life? Like that's not where you want to start. And honestly, the best place to start is just organically, right? Spend time with this person, and examine them, observe them. What's more important is not that they have every detail figured out. It's that they're willing to take this same journey of understanding that all people must take, right? It's examining their values. And they don't have to line up perfectly. I think it's totally possible for people of different values to coexist in a healthy, reciprocal relationship. Um, but more so, are they willing to look at the environment and make something of it for them and the people around them. Are they willing to understand why you did or say something and not condemn you for the saying or the action, right? And constantly bringing the best out of you. And one thing I think we could focus on here is the reciprocal nature of relationships. I think it's very easy to get complacent and be like, oh, well, this person's my friend, when really this is a relationship is a constant responsibility. And I know that can sound exhausting to some people, but again, as I mentioned, having that responsibility and being able to see you put a smile on someone's face or get them through a hard time or increase their well-being, that's the real value here. So I think maybe it would be a good idea to focus on the reciprocal nature of relationships. And maybe we could, if at any point, obviously we're pretty good friends, right? So we might be able to tie in some personal things here as well.
So I want to stress that point a little more because I definitely don't mean that you have to when coming up on a meaningful relationship, nobody has to have their life perfectly put together. I want to fixate on the fact that really what it's about is are they bringing meaning into your life and making sure that they're not being a negative impact on your life, because that's what you see a lot in broken people. And that's where it can lead to somewhat of a toxic relationship. But really, you're just looking at the reciprocal factor of a relationship, because if you aren't 100% put together, but you're bringing a quality to them that they don't have, and then they grow from that, then that's how you guys grow together. You imparted wisdom on him or her, and they grew together. And so you see that reciprocal factor in pretty close to all relationships, and romantic and friendships and parents. They're always growing together. Learning along the way. And I think that that's really what I was trying to fixate on, rather than just the fact that you have to be perfectly put together. But it's important to know how to cut well, because there's so many people that really are truly broken and are just bringing negative factors into your life, and you had to know when to sort of put your foot down and realize that this person's not good for me. This is mostly, I feel like, applied in romantic relationships, because people will stay much longer than what they know they should. But it's really every relationship, even parents. Sometimes you want to have a relationship with them, but sometimes you just have to keep them at arm's length because they're no good for you. So it's not that you should cut them off, but really what it's about is just being with those people. All you can really do is any instance where you are around those people, you just be the positive light that you can be for their life, and learn to keep what they are at a distance, and hope that they can grow into what you're bringing to the table.
Right, right, exactly. And I think this really goes back to kind of what I'd led this with the reciprocal nature of it, and you kind of picked up on it there. But I think a good way to kind of examine it is, when you look at this person that's in your life, really truly look at what they're bringing. What are they bringing to you? Do they, when you give, do they only take, or do they give as well? Are they only there for you when things are convenient? That's a really good way to kind of gauge this is, are they only there when things are good, or are they the first to be there when things are also not going well? And that's really kind of what I'm getting at with the reciprocal aspect of this is, I think a lot of people think that you're going to get to a certain point of any relationship and you're just going to be friends, or you're just going to be romantic. And then they stop kind of actively partaking in their responsibility and role with that person, and then things get difficult. And I think a good way that we can kind of talk about this is, in the framing of our own relationship that we've had. I think one important aspect here is setting expectations. It should be clear for both people what you expect of one another. I can throw one example here that's just kind of a funny, more trivial one, but really relevant. Is with me and Spencer, I don't think that we've ever got each other a birthday present. I don't think that we've ever got each other a present for anything. I think maybe I got you a card when we graduated high school, and I think you did the same for me. Maybe, I think. But I'm saying this because, neither of us take offense to this, and it's because we both have the same expectation. What we want from each other and our friendship isn't some gift that we're both going to stress unnecessarily about, right? What we're looking for is companionship and understanding and someone to listen and give
Yeah.
sound advice. So I think maybe you could pick up there on that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, because, I like that analogy of, tying in the gifts because I think that, you can even see this being used wrongly in relationships where gifts is sort of the cop out for what isn't a good relationship when they know they're not bringing anything to the table. And so, this is something I've seen across the board. They don't really give gifts very often, and it's because, they're getting the best gift they can get for them on a daily basis, where they're just bringing something to the table, by being who they are, and growing with them and spending time with them, and so you don't have to bring them flowers or get them birthday gifts or anything along that nature, and because there's not a lot of value there in comparison to what you could be getting from them, and so that's something super interesting to fixate on. And I think that that is a really good example of our relationship too, because it's our relationship has always just been very much so about growing together, and not so much about where can we materialistically material for like when we were in school, we're not looking to bum each other's grades off of each other, or look to get gifts like you were talking about. We're just looking to grow in companionship and push each other's knowledge and see where we can uh, bring positive things to the world together. That's what it's really about. And so you see that a lot in quality relationships and especially in ours.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I think one message that we're going to continually bring here is uh, is that none of this is black and white, right? Like many things are you're going to fall somewhere on the continuum, and on their face value, they're neither good or bad. S- i- Sometimes it's good to give gifts, and looking back, you know, maybe sometimes we should have, but what's more important is that we didn't need that. It wasn't an expectation, and it wasn't the thing that we based our friendship of. Obviously, neither of us would ever say that you shouldn't get your significant other flowers or give them something nice, right? But when you really look at what giving a gift is, what it really is a gesture, right? It's a reminder, like, hey, I care about this person, um, and I thought about you, and that is what should undergird the giving of gifts, and oftentimes it simply doesn't. Oftentimes it's simply a matter of it's like a transaction, right? And it so demeans what should be the motivation here, where it's like, okay, I got you something, so now you get me something, and then it's fair, right? We can call it good. And it's almost like some kind of burden, right? But really, what it is, it's the principle of giving. It's the idea behind why you did it. And if you don't have the proper motivation, not only is it shallow, but it's a good way to kind of gauge, the depth of the relationship with that person. So of course, it can be good to give gifts, but it has to be for the right reason, and it can't be solely for the act of like, oh, here's this thing that I bought for you. You know, it's more so this is how much I care about you, and you can do that in ways that aren't just a material exchange, and more importantly, by being there for that person. When you can truly share how much you care with someone is when you don't judge them unnecessarily or unfairly, and when you are there, not just when times are good. So I think that's an important qualifier there. Is the spirit of giving should be one of affection and compassion and a gesture of, hey, I was thinking about you. And that should be the thing that kind of leads the way you kind of mediate your relationships.
Right, and I completely agree, and just to touch on what you were saying there, like, I think that it's important that I'm not saying that you shouldn't be able to give gifts. It's just really about the fact that it has to be selfless, there has to
Right,
be no personal gain for that, and so I think we're all on the same page with that, but yeah, that's just the main point, that if gifts are on the table, it's meant to be in a selfless way, and since we've never really required that, it's never really been a part of our relationship, and
right.
and this is a lot of what I see in a lot of quality relationships. Not to say that you shouldn't do that, because you should always care enough to have gestures like that. And if it translates in the form of gifts, then all the better. But it is not required of anything,
Right.
and that's where the expectations comes into play. And so I want to kind of tie into why exactly relationships are so important in bringing
Mm.
purpose into our lives, and I really discuss that because I think that that's the main focus here. I want to come back to um, the reference point of death here. When people, and you've heard this before, I know you've heard this before, where they will have a near death experience, and the first thing they care about is all the connections that they've created. And so you need to use that as your reference point again to find meaning through the connections that you've created. And so when you're looking at people who seem very alone, they're often just not pursuing connections. And oftentimes you see this with just people who are unhappy in general and who are very much not at peace with themselves. It's just they haven't had meaningful connections in their life that have given them purpose and that they can look back on and appreciate. And so this isn't always to their own fault. Sometimes people just aren't presented the right people in their lives where they could have potentially grown. But either way, it's an important point to make.
Oh yeah, yeah, and there's many different ways we can kind of approach this here. We can go with like the more biological claim and historical claim that we are social creatures, and we live and share this space among other people. So there's definitely, I think, a precedent there, and some historical contingencies that lead to us really needing other people, and what we're truly needing is a connection to other people, and a feeling that there is something greater than just your own experience, but maybe an experience that you can share with other people, and in many ways it's far more grand than just walking the walk of life by yourself. So, and again, I think that there's many different ways we can approach this. I think one little bit that I'd want to say is, identifying what loneliness is. Because again, this is a motivating factor for people to pursue any kind of relationship. And one thing that I would say is true loneliness only happens when you are alone among other people. Very rarely, especially in today's world, are you actually, physically or digitally alone and separated from other people, right? And I think when you reflect on your life, the times that you felt the most alone are when you were surrounded by people but didn't have those connections, right? Didn't have that relationship. And there are people who could be 5 years into their marriage and be lonely. And it doesn't matter that they have that person with them all the time because they feel alone, even when they're with that person. And I think that's an important thing to cover here with this specific way to tackle it. And it's an important thing to understand any relationship.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And I really come back to the movie star analogy here because I think this is an important way to sort of view it, where you can be up in your ivory tower of pure success and be surrounded by what other people consider to be all these great people, and from the outside eye, it looks like they're living the dream. But really, in that sort of setting, it's hard to have meaningful connections. And so you see thousands to hundreds of thousands to millions of people, posting that they love them and that they are super incredible people and that they've impacted their lives. But even that doesn't do it because it's not a meaningful connection. So you might take those words to heart and say, I'm glad I've impacted this person, but I don't have a meaningful connection. And so you don't really take it to heart the same way you would have if your spouse said that, or if your closest friend said that, or somebody that you're just now spending some time with, even if it is sort of in a relationship, you're still going to value that more because it's somebody that you actually give and take from. And so that's a really important thing to point out. And it's important to be mindful of it moving into where meaning applies into your life and how you're going to find meaningful connections because it's not going to be online. I think it's important to point out the dangers of social media here because I think a lot of people, especially young people these days, they look for their connections elsewhere, and and you're not going to find them there. You're not going to find it um, posting on somebody's or like commenting on somebody else's post and telling them that they look pretty. That might be nice, but they're not really going to care, and you're not going to gain anything from it towards in regards to meaning towards your life. And so, where you really apply meaning uh, in connections is by contributing to that person in a meaningful way. And so, that's why I come back to purpose with this. This is why you look back on your deathbed and think, wow, I really impacted this person. I feel content. I feel like I lived a full life because you had a meaningful connection with that person and you impacted them for the good. And so it's not just that you impacted them in a large way, but you impacted them in a positive way. And so I think that's something to consider as well.
Oh yeah, and there's a lot of data now demonstrating that oftentimes people feel the most satisfied in their life when they're kind of accommodating the well-being of other people. And again, in the context of our ultimate of the ultimate resolution of our lives, you want to have shared it with other people, and in a meaningful way. I think there are truly few things more beautiful than being with a person and being utterly engaged and at the deepest level connected to them. And it doesn't matter what specific activity it might be, right? And again, this is going to differ across varying relationships. Um, but when you're truly the most in sync, and when you fall away from all of the thoughts that keep you from living in the present moment, right? That's when you're in the face of something absolutely beautiful, and it doesn't always have to be a connection that is with another person, right? It can be a connection that you have with a moment, right? With a moment that you're sharing with the atmosphere. When you're looking at a sunset or a mountain or the ocean, right? Just this moment of the resolution of the disquieted voices, right, in your own head that are constantly talking and speaking and pulling you from the moment in which you live in and into the moment of you know an anxious relationship with the future or a somber relationship with the past. And this is the thing you want to replicate in your relationships. You want to have those moments where you are truly connected, and the moments where everything else just kind of falls away and it's really just you and this person in action or in dialogue in the moment. And those are the things to really focus on and cherish as you move forward with that person.
Right, and I think an important point to make here is how important it is to be just present. And you're kind of already touching on that, but I want to just kind of solidify what you're saying, and just whenever these meaningful things happen, you're not taking pictures. You're not writing about it. You're in the moment. You're experiencing it. You're totally engaged, like you were saying, in that moment, rather than adding these superficial things. And, I want to tie in something kind of personal here because, and I talked about this with one of my best friends, Eli, a lot, where we would sometimes when we were doing the things that were kind of crazy, we would put the camera down and just enjoy it. Like we were always setting out to get this awesome footage of something super beautiful, and oftentimes the beauty of it would die in the video, and we wouldn't really feel like we experienced much. And so at a certain point, we kind of realized this and started to put the camera down, and things changed when we did that. It became something completely else, where we were able to appreciate the moments, not only with what we were experiencing, but with each other. We grew a lot more that way. I think many times when we would go out to shoot something, we would just come back and we'd have something cool, but it wouldn't feel the same as a quality moment would have. And so it is incredibly important to remain present in the moment and not attach these superficial things to it when you're talking about a meaningful relationship, because that's one of the main dangers that I see, especially in our society, where we all want to post our super cool moments on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok and just do all of these sort of superficial things and take this moment that's really pure and raw and then try to sort of flex with it online, and that's where we start to slip into very superficial, meaningless things.
Right, right. And you know, one other thing that I want to touch on here that I think is important is how, with any relationship, just like with your life, right? It's not always going to be perfect, right? Your relationship with that other person isn't always going to be that moment in front of the sunset. And there will be highs and lows, because there are highs and lows in life. And one thing that I kind of wanted to touch on here is conflict. And I think this is actually something that we haven't really spoken about before, regarding this topic, but we have in the grander scale of life, right? Like we have spoken about how conflict is, not only just a byproduct of living, but also integral, to discovering who you are. And I think it's also important to discover how the relationship is, right? People get in fights, with their friends and with their significant others, and it's always seen as this negative, right? And what I'd like to kind of entertain is this idea that it's only negative if the fight ends and neither of you had a changing of opinion, right? That's the only time when it's negative. But if you're in an argument with someone and you both have a different perspective and you come to a real resolution, of the issue, um, that's where you discover not only who you are, but who you are in relation to that person. And it is one of the greatest pleasures that comes from relationships, because it can be another method for figuring out, not only who you are, but who you are in relationship to other people.
Yeah, and I kind of want to just tie this back into what we were talking about, which is struggle in general. Conflict is a form of struggle, and so this is where meaning lies. If you had a conflict with somebody and you came out the better for it, really you shouldn't have a negative outlook on what that was. You should be considering the weight of the fact that it helped you grow together, and despite the conflict, you came out the other side. And so. Having no fights, that's just not realistic. You have to disagree on certain things, but that's to grow. The important thing to do is just to sort of take yourself out of it, and take the pride out of it, and just accept whether, if somebody's right, you should be able to say that they were right. And that's how you maintain a quality relationship. About you don't focus on being so prideful, and that's where relationships often go to die.
Right.
And so it's really important to just be mindful of respecting what they're saying, and if they have something that they are trying to tell you that may not be what you want to hear, it's about appreciating that and appreciating the fact that they put themselves out there in a way that you know they might be worried about being offensive, but
Hmm.
really they're trying to look out for you, and those kind of qualities are what we're looking for in somebody that we keep in our lives. It's not the people who sit there and lie to us and tell us, "Yes, you look pretty. Yes, you're not, gaining weight. It's the people who tell us, hey, like if you ask them something, whether genuinely, like have I gained some weight, sometimes it's better to be honest about certain things because if they're really concerned about it, that's the kind of thing that they're confiding in you and to tell them the truth. And so that's what you are there for, and it's not really to just be um, somebody who fluffs their pillow, so to speak. It's somebody
Right.
who tells them honest truths, whether they want to hear it or not. Is what you believe to be the better thing for them.
Right. Exactly. You don't want just yes men constantly in your corner. And what you don't want to be is accommodating people's feelings. I know that might sound jarring because I know a lot of people consider the goal of a relationship to be, to be responsible or to, uh, make people's feelings better. But in a true relationship, what people really want is honesty and authenticity and trust. And when people come to you with a problem or anything like that, or with an idea, you need to be honest with, the goal is to bring the best out of that person, and not because that's your job, but because it's the best thing for them. And if you care about someone in any capacity, you want what's best for them, right? And what's best for them isn't accommodating bad ideas or bad actions or bad, like harsh words that they've said, right? When someone does something wrong, you tell them that you think it was wrong. Because that's the only, if they have their best friend, for example, saying that, okay, yeah, what you did is okay, then they're going to do that thing again and again and again. And someone has to be the hard stop. And always, it seems, that is the person that cares the most. And I think this is an excellent place to kind of tie in something else I know we were wanting to talk about, which is vulnerability and its importance. And I'm sure you have some stuff to say about it, but I'll just introduce it a little bit here. That way I don't just drop it on you. Um, but just kind of the idea that vulnerability is necessary, and that the only way you're ever going to be able to have a true relationship or true peace, or even, again, coming back to, allowing the conditions for happiness to descend upon you, those conditions are dependent on you making yourself vulnerable, not just to the world, but also the actions and thoughts and words of other people. And I didn't know if maybe you had anything to say about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that, you know, when people become bitter, they also put up walls, and it's usually from past trauma. And where growth exists is behind those walls. And so you have to sort of learn to drop them to become a better person. So let's just take fitness for example. We put up walls saying that, you like how you look and that you don't need to change it. And maybe that is the case, and that's totally fine. And we're not judging whether or not it's good to be fit or not. We're just judging how you feel about yourself personally. So if you personally want to be more fit, then it's important to be vulnerable even to yourself and say, I don't like how I look. I need to go to the gym. I need to go start eating in a way that reflects my mindset. Not in a way that's terrible for my body, but uh, I need to start cooking my own meals and doing things that are going to impact myself in a positive way. And so it's not just externally that we see vulnerability. It's very much internally, being able to admit to ourselves that there's a problem. And I'm just using fitness as an example because it's super simple, but this applies to really anything. So you're not going to develop quality relationships if you're not vulnerable. Uh, you're just going to have a wall of fear that exists from not wanting to be hurt by that person. This is mostly true when you're talking about a significant other, but it applies to everything. I think parents is another good one because if somebody is not good for you, you put up a wall and you try to keep them out. But really, where growth exists is learning to accept the person they are, and you just be the person that you can be. Um, in a positive way towards them. And
Mm,
so you see that as another example of that. But in relationships, you see a lot of people who will put up walls to not be hurt by the other person. They won't even get into a relationship because they're not in a place for it, quote unquote. And that's usually just because they haven't learned how to be vulnerable, and they're so fixated on not feeling pain uh, that they can't make sense of being hurt by another person. So really, this ties back into peace because if you're at
mm,
peace with yourself, what that person thinks of you isn't going to wreck you at the end of the day. You're just able to be the person you are. And if somebody else appreciates that and it grows with you, then that's just all the more beautiful. And you should be able to love and appreciate that for what it is. And so if somebody doesn't appreciate you and, you're sort of riding the wave down, it's okay to be upset, but at the end of the day, you're not destroyed by it. That person's opinion is not what defines you. It's just they didn't see you for what you were, or they just weren't the right person for you, which is completely
mm.
okay. This is true in friendships. This is true in really anything, any relationship. It's not just significant others, but significant others is where you see it the most, probably. So I think it's important to make that distinction. And if you want to talk about that a little bit.
There's lots of different ways you can take this. I mean, again, this doesn't just apply to relationships; it applies within individuals too. I think there's a huge propensity to fall into these cycles, and oftentimes the cycles are something bad happens, so you then throw up a barrier, right, and then you take less risk. And then maybe something else bad happens, and then you thicken the barrier. You take even less risks, and what happens then is you are then locked and a cycle of constant unhappiness. Um, and really, when we opened up, or shortly after, and we were talking about happiness, one thing that we said was, again, what is in your control is creating the conditions for it to happen. And that requires risk, right? You won't be happy if you're the most protected, right? If you lock yourself up in your room and you never leave and you never allow anybody to have the opportunity to hurt you, then you will also never have the opportunity for anybody ever to make you happy. So any kind of outcome that you would ever want for yourself or for other people requires risk, right? It requires vulnerability. And not just in relationships, but just in your life in general. I think one thing maybe we could touch on briefly here is the attractiveness of pessimism, right? Of being jaded and of kind of locking off certain life experiences from yourself because somewhere along the line you decided that you knew enough and you knew the best, and that's just not going to happen, or that's just naive. And this can very easily apply to relationships, right? Like if you've come out of the past, maybe you've had 5 relationships and all of them sucked, right? And you've just decided, yep, nope, this isn't for me, right? Because it just always ends this way. And you become kind of jaded to that connection with another person. you know, uh, you're then limiting the possibility of you ever having a good relationship with another person or with your life, right? Again, just to tie us back in, it's always about, would I buy this book, right? Would you buy the movie? Would you buy the movie ticket when the trailer was, some parts of your life, right? And constantly reevaluating, not just, your relationships, but also yourself. So vulnerability here is huge, and it really ties into honesty, truth and authenticity, not just with yourself, but with the person who you are in a relationship with as well.
I completely agree. And I actually want to give a quick story here. And I think it's a useful analogy in what we're discussing. So I was riding my motorcycle and I was actually going um, to get life insurance at this time. And I rode up and I was talking to a secretary at the time. She was probably like mid 50s or so. And when we were talking, I said, she made a comment about the motorcycle being dangerous. And I said, oh, yeah, all the best things in life have risks and dangers involved. And she was like, haha, no, they don't. And I thought about this a lot because I was like, not to attack secretaries here because there's nothing wrong with being a secretary. It's just about your mindset. And I could see it playing out in her own life in this respect because, she was clearly somebody not taking very many risks. And she hadn't achieved on face value this is. And this could be the most interesting person on the planet. I'm not meaning to attack that in this respect, but just for this analogy, she was a secretary in her mid 50s, and she didn't see the value in risks. And it's really because of the fact that she hadn't taken any and learned to put herself out there and be vulnerable. And so I thought about that a lot because I think it's a useful analogy when you're trying to figure out what's going to bring meaning and joy into your life. And I loved riding the motorcycle, and so when she said that, it was kinda jarring to me, and I thought a lot about it, and I really think it's because you have to take risks, just like you're saying, to get anything meaningful out of your life, you have to take risks and put yourself out on a limb where you could fall in, where you could make a major mistake, and then if you do, you just learn to grow from it, and that's where bring it back into peace, is so important because, when you fall, it's okay, you're not destroyed by it. You just take it for what it is. You learn from the experience and you move on in a constructive way. And that's the way you have to approach really every situation. And that's how you find true inner peace.
Right. And I think um, a good other aspect of this too is, we live in this world where there is conflict and where the events are out of your control and where you can't micromanage every aspect of your experience, right? And that's what makes it interesting, right? Like, when you look at the stories, and I mean on a grander scale, right? Just narratives, myths, stories that you're the most gripped by, right? You're on the edge of your seat listening. or viewing this life, right, fictional or otherwise. It's when it's dynamic, when it's not static, right? When there's a colossal failure and then a stunning recovery, and you see this amazing growth in the person you're viewing. That dynamic experience is what makes things interesting. And I'm not trying to glorify struggle, but what I'm saying is that it has great utility, and it's absolutely unavoidable. Everybody's going to struggle. Everybody's going to have tragedy, right? Everybody has baggage and everybody has trauma, right? Now, there's varying levels of this. I'm not trying to downplay some outstanding experiences people may have, right? Where things can get really bad, or other people could lead a very pampered life. But ultimately, it's only a matter of time, right? Time will consume all, and in time, all will be revealed. And you can only live this comfy life so long before something undesirable happens to you, right? So my point is, it happens indiscriminate of who you are, right? And the true gauge of who you are and how good you are is the manner in which you respond to them and the manner in which you understand them. And it applies to relationships. It applies to your own life. And I think really just framing your experience with the proper perspective is the greatest tool, right? And the steps towards working that tool in the best way it can be is in pursuing the understanding of who you are and what you want, right? And looking at it from the end and then tracing back to the beginning. That way you can ensure that you start your story with the story that you'd want to read. Um, and I think that's just important in general, for people to kind of get the meaning and get the importance that they're looking for in their life.
I completely agree, and I'll always believe that the narrative analogy is such an important one because it keeps you mindful of death and its importance and how it can play out in your own life, and it keeps you pushing yourself and trying new things and uh, experiencing things that if it wasn't happening, that you might not have the urgency that you currently do to go do, you know?
Right.
And so it's important to always remember that. But I want to kind of put a cap on this. Um, let's just talk about um, kind of an overview of this whole conversation. So with purpose, it comes back to in a lot of ways where you're going to find the most purpose giving to other people. This is in the form of connections. This is in the form of your workplace. This is in the form of your just day-to-day activities. You want to find things that bring value into other people's lives, and oftentimes this is where the most purpose exists. And it's not just other people, but internally as well. This is why the gym brings you purpose. This is why um, pushing your own mind and learning and being the student at all times is so important because it brings purpose into your life, and then you bring it to other people, and you continue to let that ripple effect take place. Because if you bring it to one person, then it goes to the next, and they continue this effect of where people are learning from each other and constantly growing, and that's how you really solve all things. You just you make people more aware of what they are, and connections always plays a major point in this, and that's where love ties in, and that's why it's so important to have those meaningful connections that you can be the teacher and you can be the student at all times, and learn from them, and no matter where those relationships take you, um, whether they end and you just get to appreciate what they were when you had them. This is where peace comes in because you're not rocked by the downfalls of life, and you're not rocked by the waves that are ever coursing through you. You're just appreciating the highs, and you're appreciating the lows for what you learn from them. And I don't know if you want to kind of tie it up a little more for me, but I'll let you take that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think in many ways we've at least ran the course of a lot of the things that we wish to talk about, and I think there's a lot here for future conversation, and this is certainly a topic that needs to continue to be dissected, and not just by us but by everybody. And in regards, just to pick up from where you just left off, I think that the thing that we really hope people take away from this is to not focus so much on what's going to make you happy. and ultimately to be kind to yourself and observe the things that are in your control and out of your control, and judge your character and that of others based off of those things that are in their control. And if you do that, then you're going to resolve a lot of this conflict that we find ourselves living in. And you do that through, a meaningful connection to something greater than yourself. And it can come in many different forms. But ultimately, people want to feel as if they are approaching the infinite, even within the space of their own finite time, right? They're approaching the infinite with something that's grand and something that's outspoken and beautiful, and something that's going to last longer than their own self. And people want to feel like they're making a contribution to the world, right? So I ultimately think that's the conversation that we want to be having, and that's the space in which people want to live.
Right. And yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that most of what we talked about here is just going to be a good sort of compass for our listeners, and that's really what it was meant to be from the get go. Is just a good way to navigate your life in a meaningful way. So if you're taking anything from this, I think the main focus should just be that these three main topics of love, purpose, and peace, they're really tools to navigate your life in a fulfilling, meaningful way. And if you've gained nothing else from this whole entire conversation, just gain that, because that is where the most growth will happen, just focusing on those things. And in my personal opinion, this is just my one liner, but I think it has implications for everybody, whether you agree with it or not.
Yeah, yeah, and I think again, I think it's important that we stress that, by no means are we the people with all the answers, right? And there's people that maybe have some more lived experience, and maybe some more words of wisdom. And what's important is that you always keep your ears open. And I think one important quote that I've heard somewhere is, treat everybody like they've got something of vital importance to tell you, right? And I think what's important here, and a goal for us, not individually and also together, is that we stimulate important conversation, and we share our opinion not because we think it's gospel, but because we want to start something in which we also may be able to learn, right? And I can speak for both of us here, but I think we both eagerly await other perspectives, and I know we would both take great pleasure in being introduced to new things and other ideas on these topics and other people's mindsets. So
Absolutely, and I think that it always just ties into, being the student, and so no matter what topic is presented to us, I think that there's always something to gain from it. I've had conversations with, flat earthers, and I feel like I've walked away with something that's meaningful out of it, and that's how you do it. You just have conversations no matter how ludicrous, and try to grow from them, and gain perspective on whatever idea they have, or whatever idea you have, and just look at it with the best possible perspective. But anywho, I want to just go ahead and say thanks for coming on, and we'll probably be doing several of these together, so everybody has lots to look forward to. And we're gonna be trying to put these out as much as possible. So first off, thanks for listening to what is my first podcast, and one of Noah's first videos, and I just I'm very excited for the rest.
yeah, I just one quick word here. I think we're both really excited, not only for what we have to bring, but also what we stand to gain by learning from other people. And be sure to follow both of us as we kind of go along this journey. I think in some topics we're going to share. Obviously some conversations we're going to want to have together, and we'll come together just like this. But both of us kind of have our own path that we're going to walk here, and just be sure, if this is something you're interested to, just keep track of what both of us are doing. And always remember, both of us are going to be sure, if you are curious, we're going to link all of our stuff in every way that we can, right? So I'm going to put his information. If this is on YouTube that you're seeing this, I'll put it in the description. And if you're seeing this over a podcast medium, it'll be in the podcast description if that's what you're interested in.
Absolutely. So, on that note, I just want to say thank you so much for making it to this point and listening to the whole our entire discussion and dissecting our minds. And I'm very excited for what's coming. So thanks everybody, and we'll be seeing you in the next one.
Yeah. Thank you.